All right, so welcome to our discussion of the Jews' miraculous existence in the desert. How did they do it? What are some of the both biblical stories and midrashic stories about how the Jews actually were able to make it in the desert? What are some of the theories of the rabbis over the centuries as to how it worked? How did they survive? Where did they get clothing from? Where did they get all the food from? How did it work? So my wife is actually very interested in this topic, and she found it very interesting to read some recent novels that were written about Jews in the desert. The Daughters of Sphard-Beth book, another book where people try to imagine what it was actually like in the desert. So maybe today's talk will help us understand, what was it like for the Jews in the desert. So let us begin at the beginning. Here we go. So here they are. They're walking through the desert. The Jews in the desert. How do they do it? How clothing, shoes, food, etc. So we mentioned this topic this particular week because at the end of the Parsha, it says the following. I helped you go and walk in the desert for 40 years. Your garments, your dresses did not wither from your bodies. What does that mean? The garments didn't wither? Nor the clothes on your back did not wear out. Your sandals did not wear out on your feet. So they didn't need new shoes. I need new shoes about once every 2-3 years. I have to either get new soles or new shoes. So what did the Jews do? Where did they get new shoes? They're walking in the desert. They're walking. It's not like me. I'm sitting here in my study here. What did the Jews do? How did they survive for 40 years? You didn't eat any bread. Really? The Jews didn't have any bread for 40 years? What about the bread from heaven? Isn't that considered bread? You didn't drink any wine or heavy drink. Really? The Jews didn't have any wine? Couldn't they get some wine from someplace? There's always wine. Even during the prohibition, there was wine. So what do you mean? You know why? I did this so you. So how did it work? How did their clothes not wither out, not wear away? Their shoes didn't wear out. What's going on? So we turn to the Netziv, who sort of makes an interesting homily about it. Probably should put this at the end of the class instead of the beginning, but it's very, very interesting. He says, the divine providence was with you even when it didn't seem so. God literally hid his face. There's an idea that sometimes God is not seen. He hides his face. What does he mean? What do you mean? This is an open miracle. If their garments never withered, they looked at their clothes after 5 days. They said, my clothes don't smell. They're not brown with dirt and sweat. This is amazing. That's an open miracle. He says, no. The garments of Jews were not created like the Maneh or the well in a miraculous way, but in a hidden providence. Your garments and shoes didn't wither. They wake up in the morning and their clothes were as white as ever. So it was sort of surprising. It was not an open miracle. It was sort of a hidden miracle. And a hidden, I'm just going to put you back on mute, Morris, because of the dog. But you can take yourself off later if you'd like to ask a question anytime. But in a hidden providence, your garments and shoes didn't wither. So too you understand that even in the depths of sorrow, providence will strongly be with you. God knows who trusts in him, even in this bad time. So it won't be that bad. So sometimes, even in the worst times, there could be miracles. You have to look for the small miracles. You have to look for things like, I haven't gotten a new watch in a long time. These little Timex things for $20, they usually wear out. But I've had the same one for 5-6 years now, and it hasn't worn out. I didn't have to spend another $25 on a watch. That's quite a thing. So there are these little miracles that it can happen. Which is a miracle, but we have to, be appreciative of small things. Your stocks didn't go down halfway during the things that we have to appreciate. Now, the Netziv also learned an important message for us today in exile outside of Israel. He says, even when the long galut, or in the 2,000-year exile that we live in, can still have glows of glory. Look at that Jew over there, right? Let's imagine that he was in Eastern Europe in the year 1900, when he experienced 1880, he remembered there was a pogrom. His cousin got thrown off a roof during a Kishinev riot. And they're glorious, but it's good enough. When Shabbos comes, he's in his glory. There was a homeless man who lived in our neighborhood when I was growing up, and he wore a long coat like an old European Jew. And we had a picnic table in the backyard. I'm not saying I'm so proud of the way we treated him, but listen to this story. My mother looks out the window, and there he is. Someone gave him some food and this and that. And he sat on the bench, and he was singing Smiros. He was singing songs for Shabbos. You can have dignity even when you're homeless, if you have faith in God, if you have God with you. The Medrash, and I'm sorry I don't have a translation here, but listen to this Medrash. Medrash says like this. Rabbi Yossi Bechina said, whatever was on them didn't wear out, but what they had in their boxes, supply boxes, that did wear out. Now I saw another comment, I think it was Rashi, said that it's not true. I'm sorry. So there are other opinions, but this is interesting. In other words, they tried to take extra clothes. That didn't work. Sometimes you look at your old clothes that you have in the cabinet. You figure I haven't worn it for many years. You look at it, and I don't know, the moss ate it or something. It's not like it used to be. It ain't what it used to be. But he says no. The ones that they had in store, you think they'd be in pristine condition. They were worn out, but what they were wearing remained. Whatever was, in other words, any excess that didn't work, but whatever they had stayed. Another interpretation. Their clothes didn't wear out. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Shimon ben Yochai was a great mystic who spent many years in a cave, and his son Rabbi Elazar. So his son Rabbi Elazar asked Rabbi Shimon ben Yossi Chamiv, his father-in-law. He asked his father-in-law, "Klei Kurios Yotzu Misov Mitzrayim." So he says, "What kind of garments did they wear that they didn't wear out?" So he says, "Look, the garments they had were not regular garments. They were garments that the angels gave them at Mount Sinai. There's an idea that at Mount Sinai we were given crowns and jewelry, and now they're saying that we were given clothes. Whatever clothes we wore at Mount Sinai, we were in such a glorious moment. We were in all of our glory at Mount Sinai, and that remained at Mount Sinai, and that's why it didn't wear out." So the student said to the rabbi, to his father-in-law, to the rabbi, "Lo yugdelim." What do you mean? Little boys, didn't they grow up? Little girls, didn't they get bigger? Right? Remember when you were little, I used to go so fast when I was 10, 12 years old. I always had short pants. So didn't their pants get short? Amar lo, al titmalzo. Don't worry about it. Hakilazonazeh. He says, take a snail. When it gets bigger, how does the shell grow? I don't know. God figures it out. So your clothes can grow too. So he says, but didn't they need laundry? So he said, the cloud would come, and sometimes you walk through a mist. There would be like a cloud, and it would do the laundry for them. It would, while they were wearing it, it would come and it would do the laundry. So he says, but then they would be burnt from the cloud. The cloud was sort of like a fire. He says, nah, it's all right. Don't worry about it. There are other animals and creatures that can survive the fire, and the cloud would get them, and it wouldn't be destroyed. He says, what about worms and what do they call? What did I mention before? Moths, right? Moth. Maybe the moths would eat it. So he says, look, truly righteous people, even when they're dead, the worms and the maggots don't eat them up. So surely when they're alive, the moth didn't affect them. So he says, yeah, but they must have stunk after all that sweating. So he says, no. When you drink water from that special well, which we'll talk about, it was so fragrant that their fragrance would go through the whole world. As it says in the Song of Songs, the smell of your garments was like the smell of the Lebanon. Lebanon, probably beautiful trees. It was like a nice forest. And it all comes from the fact that they drank from the Be'er Mayim Chayim. They drank from the well. So we have this idea that the laundry, in the desert, they had a special laundry service where the clouds of glory would surround them, and the cloud would go through them, and the laundry, like going through a car wash, the laundry was done. Why was it? What's the meaning of all this? We'll get to it. Tanchuma talks a little bit about the clouds and the well. He says, I, God, gave the leaders. What do we need? 3. Micah, in front of it. I sent you 3 leaders, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. It's a wonderful verse for those who have feminist inclinations. By Moshe, they were led by Moshe and Aaron and Miriam. So how did Miriam lead? So some say that she led the women, or whatever it was. But this midrash says no, leadership in a different sense. Leadership means to take care of the people. But because of Moshe, God says, you know what? I'll give them the man. And because of Aaron, he says, you know what? I'll give you the clouds of glory. And he says, actually, there were 7 clouds. 1 above, 1 below, like they were walking in a bed of clouds. And then from 4 different corners, all different sides, they had clouds. 1 would go in front of them and destroy all the snakes in the desert. After all, there's snakes, scorpions. And then if there was any hills, it's difficult to walk on a hill in a valley, so it would straighten it out. And it would also, as we mentioned, the clouds had a certain fire element to them, because, you have lightning in the clouds. It would also burn all the thistle, because you don't want to walk on a cactus. If the clouds would go through your body, it would be like smoky. So he said, no, don't worry about it. So after all, you want to put it on the hot cycle. You don't want to put it on the cold cycle. But the rabbi said, no, don't worry about it. So it's interesting. There were not just 1 cloud of glory, but there were 7 clouds of glory. Some say that's why, like the sukkah represents the clouds of glory from all around the 4 walls and the top and the bottom. Now, the midrash continues that it says that your garments didn't wear out, and a child, as long as he grew her area, and no more well. How did the well work? Is there's a certain rock, and it would go with them wherever they went. And when they encamped, they would encamp, and the rock would go near the tent of meeting, near the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and all the leaders would come and stand around, and they would say, come on up, well. And the well would come up from that rock. And then he also gave them slav. They also had the special quail and other birds that would come. They would have chicken or fowl meat as well. Now, all this stuff we talked about, the Ibn Ezra, he was a religious man. I'm sure he believed in miracles. If the sea split, the sea split. But here, in general, the naturalists, including the Rambam, and the Ibn Ezra also, the Sephardic authorities particularly, not all of them, some of them were big supernaturals, but those rationalists in the rationalist school, they don't like things to be too miraculous. All the stuff we've been talking about, it's very cute, but they don't like that type of stuff. So they say, well, wait a second. Maybe we can give a natural explanation as to how the clothes, some people say, they took a lot of garments out of Egypt. And whatever they needed remained. Yeah, it could also be said that since they ate the man, you don't sweat from man. If you eat a big hamburger, maybe you get sweaty. But if you eat man, you don't sweat. If you don't sweat, your clothes don't wear out. So that's a natural explanation also, based on the man, which was a miracle that the Ibn Ezra would certainly accept. And as far as the garments, he said they brought a lot of garments with them. Don't forget, they borrowed garments from the Egyptians. So he's trying to give an actual explanation, meaning they had enough clothing to last them for 40 years. I don't know about you, when we go on a vacation, we bring enough clothing for 40 years. So did they. What about the shoes? Usually your feet would swell. It could be that their feet didn't swell up because they were in good shape, or they walked slowly. Okay? We didn't rush in the desert. It was pleasant. It was a pleasant walk. We didn't hike in the desert. They walked slowly, like, man, dignity. and that's why their feet didn't swell up. The Ramban objected to this. By the way, the Ramban thought this is ridiculous. It was a miracle. Torah over here says very explicitly that there was a miracle. Why are you turning this into some sort of non-miracle? And there was another rabbi, the Hoyle Moshe. I've got to get more familiar with him. He was a student of the Shadal. Shadal was a rationalist from Italy in the 19th century. And his student was Hoyle Moshe. He was a Sephardic Jew. And so he agrees with that interpretation. I'm sorry, the great rationalist, the great commentator. He wasn't really a rabbi. He was more of a scholar. So he said, you didn't. It wasn't like your clothes wore out and then you had to switch it. You would wear the clothes and then you get some new clothes. Like in America, most people don't wear their clothes until they have holes in their elbows, like in a lot of poor people in Eastern Europe and other places. Well, it gets slightly frayed. My collar is getting a little bit, so I throw it away. But it was never got to that point. And your feet did not swell up without shoes because they had shoes, because God provided everything you need. But it's not that their garments was some miracle, he says. They didn't get so sweaty and all that. Sometimes when you're in a hike, your clothes get ruined, that they would need to wear worn out garments. They were able to switch it around. He proves it from the Nehemiah. When the Nehemiah tells the story, Ezra and Nehemiah, the Second Temple, the last book in the Bible. So one of the last books. So he says, 40 years, Nehemiah says, I provided for you in the desert, and you didn't lack any garments. It doesn't say that he says you had enough garments. So he wants to claim that it doesn't mean, it means that you didn't run out of garments, is what it means. You went in your suitcase, got another one, and it survived. Okay. I see someone else is here named Ikil iPhone 8. Who is that? Anyway, we welcome you. If you want to identify yourself, that'd be great. Now it says they did not eat bread and wine and strong drink you did not eat. So the Ramban said, really, they had no bread? That doesn't sound very good to have no bread for 40 years. So he says, that doesn't mean they didn't eat bread. Now the Ramban is a mystic, but he feels that it's not necessary to say that. As a matter of fact, it says that they were willing to buy bread from the local family as we pass through, from the Moabites and the Edomites. So it says we were going to buy bread. So what does it mean they didn't have bread? He says sometimes they had bread. The Esav gave us bread, and the rabbis mentioned in Yoma that there were merchants who would bring them bread. In other words, don't think that the desert is like this empty place where it's like echo. There were people. It was carrot. It was the desert, Sinai, or part of Jordan that's very desert-like, or the southern Israel. They're not deserts like the Sahara. It's a place where people pass through. When the caravans passed through, they would get spices and food, and sometimes they got bread. So it's not that they never had bread, just usually they didn't have bread. So he turns our attention to Yoma. Let's look at the Gemara in Yoma, the Talmud. It says, what is a whole discussion about the man? It says sometimes they would grind the man. So he says, when the man came, they used to have diamonds that came with it. So they not only had food, they had enough jewelry as well. Because sometimes you have to grind the diamonds, so that's why it says they ground it. And also, they got spices. Parur, the spices came with it. Sometimes you buy some rice pilaf and you get a little spice pack that comes with it. So they had spice packs that come with the man as well. Wonderful midrashim. And it tasted like oil or something, a cake of oil. So the rabbis explain that just like a little baby when he's sucking from his mother, he enjoys it. It's like all different tastes. So too when you had man, it tasted like a lot of different things. And so that's the famous midrash that kids always learn in school, that man tasted like whatever you wanted it to taste like. Okay. The Ramban. Let's continue with the Gemara. The Gemara says it's lechem abirim. It was. What does that mean? That it goes into your avarim. It's a pun. The food just goes into your body, but you don't excrete anything. You see, theoretically, why do we excrete things? Because we absorb and get energy from the important part, and the chaff that we don't need, we excrete. But the man was a perfect food. It had no excess, so they never excreted for 40 years. But he says, wait a second. The Torah says you need a bathroom. When you go to war, you have to have a latrine. You can't just live like an animal. So what do you need a bathroom for? The Jews didn't have to go to the bathroom for 40 years. So he says, well, there were sometimes they would buy things from local merchants passing through the desert, and that food, they had to go to the bathroom. And another interpretation is that that no, even what they bought from the merchants, they didn't need to go to the bathroom in the desert. But why did the Torah say to make a latrine when you go to war? If the Jews sin, then they would need to go to the bathroom. But as long as they were in the desert, they lived at a special level where they didn't even need to go to the bathroom. So it's a very, very interesting midrash. The Ramban says, hold on a second, let me just put that on mute over there. Mark, I'm just going to put you on mute. You're welcome to ask a question later if you'd like. He says, whenever they passed by the Edomites and the Moabites, they did get bread from them and water. And those who were wealthy used to buy water. But that was not, they would buy bread, but it wasn't something normal. And generally speaking, they didn't have bread for 40 years. It doesn't mean they never ate bread. That's not the point. Okay. But actually, the discussion about this business that their clothes didn't wear out is more prominent, not in our Parsha. Most people think about it from Parashat Ekev a few weeks ago, beginning chapter 8. It says there, your garments didn't wear out from you, and your feet did not swell. I don't know. What do you think, Diana? Is that a good comparison? The texture of a callus with dough. What do you think, Diana?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. So someone said that. One of the commentators said that. It's interesting. Anyway, so let's look at the commentaries on that verse. So, because whenever something's mentioned first, it always gets more comments. So the Rashi says that the clouds would surround their garments and do a good laundry on them, just like the best laundry, dry cleaning, and even the small children, their clothes grew with them, like the shell of a snail which grows with it, and your feet didn't grow up, or didn't swell, because usually when you walk, your feet swell up, but not these guys. Okay, that's Rashi. There's something called, my daughter-in-law told me it's actually a medieval commentary. It's not a midrash, but most people call it midrash lekachto. And it says that they were lifted. Why didn't their feet swell up? Because then they walked on clouds. They were lifted above the ananim, above the clouds. So it's very interesting. They walked on air. So that's another midrash, another idea of how special the existence in the desert was. Again, for those who came late, trying to understand the existence of the Jews in the desert. But now we get to the key point. All right, this is all very cute, very nice. The Jews in the desert, they didn't have to do any dry cleaning. They saved a lot of money on dry cleaning. They had instant wear, right? Okay, they had special food. But what's the point of it all? Why did the Jews have special food in the desert? Why didn't God say, all right, you go on this path where you'll get food from local merchants? What's going on? So the Yosef B'Choshor is always trying to explain why. He's very into the why. When he's both in the legal part and here in the non-legal section, he wants to know why is it? Why did they have such luxury in the desert? So it's really God loves us, but what else? God, there are two things that keep us busy all day. We're trying to make a living. Why? We need clothes and food. Of course, we also need a shelter too, but that's another topic that God gave us Sukkot, right? Something to live under the clouds. But that's what keeps us busy. So God didn't want us to be busy. He wanted mitzvot. He just wanted to teach us the Torah and keep the mitzvot. In other words, the 40 years was an incubation period. How could the Jews do? Could the Jews in the desert just follow the Torah, just learn Torah, absorb the new lessons of all the different myriads of laws that they needed to absorb, so they would be the first Jews who knew it all, who knew how do you do sukkos and tefillin and tzitzis and lulav and shofar, how do you do it all? And they needed that time to incubate the whole Jewish project. And they needed to have no worries, only Torah and mitzvahs. The Mechilta actually has several opinions about this business of them. Learn a number of interesting answers to the question: why did the Jews in the desert have all these luxuries of no laundry, no other food was needed? So, listen to the Midrash. Rabbi Yeshua says, you know why? They got daily food, once in the morning, once in the evening. He says, a Jew should collect the food from today to tomorrow, like we collect food from one Shabbos to the next. I'm not sure exactly what he was saying. I can see it a number of ways. Maybe it's like, look, you should make your daily living. Don't worry. Sometimes we worry. What's going to be? How is my pension going to last 20 years from now? Don't worry about 20 years. You have enough today. Tomorrow you'll figure out tomorrow. So that's one idea. Or that, we prepare our food and then it lasts through Shabbos. We work during the week and then on Shabbos we don't work and we're able to have enough on Shabbos. Rabbi Lezer says, from Modi'in, he says, just like on every week, we have enough food from today till Shabbos, and then on Shabbos, I don't worry about my food. So too, they had to have faith. Today they have food, and tomorrow they have faith for tomorrow. Rabbi Lezer, he says, anybody who has enough to eat today, and he says, what am I going to eat tomorrow? He doesn't have enough faith. So this is part of the lesson is, be happy with what you have today, and don't worry too much about tomorrow. Of course, we have to figure out how we're going to make a living tomorrow, but we don't have to worry about it. We can just, trust that it'll work out, but we do have to, of course, figure out the details. And Rabbi Yeshua said that it's really telling us not just about food, but also about learning. That every morning we should learn 2 laws, 2 Mishnahs, and 2 laws in the evening, and then you can work all day, and it's as if you learn Torah all day. So just like they had man in the morning, man in the evening, so too we should have a little bit of spiritual food every morning and every evening. Rabbi Shimon Yochai says that based on the idea of the man, he says if they had the man, he says the real Torah was given to those who had man. In other words, Torah is so demanding that we need to study it so much that the only way to really live the full life, he thought it was a very ideal period where the Jews were able to just sit and study and meditate and think and learn and absorb the Torah, and they had no other worries. And the real people who kept the Torah were the people in the desert. Now, this may fly in the face of some people who think of the Jews in the desert as very rebellious and terrible. There's a midrashic idea that the Jews in the desert were wonderful. Those are the real Jews who were able to just dedicate themselves to Torah, nothing else. Says the only other person who's comparable, he says, Ochle Haman, Truma. The Kohanim who get food from the people, who get the government handout, they are the only ones you can compare to people in the desert, right? So, or those with the government handouts, also similar to those in the desert. The Hizkuni says, the lesson is like this. If God provided for us in the desert, where it's so hard to provide, certainly when we go to Israel, and today when we're not living in the desert, certainly God will provide. The Malbim lived in the 19th century also in Poland. He says, you know what? We had them on three things. Number one, to increase the spirit over the body, to emphasize the spirit, not so much the food. And the idea was to inculcate this idea of spirituality in their hearts, so the Torah would be guarded in their heart. He wanted the 40 years that it should be an incubation period. The Jews should incubate with the Torah for 40 years. And to get into their heart. And also to afflict them before coming to Israel, which is acquired by suffering. You can't acquire something good without working hard. So he gave them 40 years, which weren't so pleasant. This is the second view. Now we're saying that not so great in the desert. It was difficult because Jews, people like meat, bread, wine, beer. We like that stuff. So not everyone likes beer, but a lot of people do. And without suffering, you can't acquire the land of Israel. So that's another version of it, and that comes out very much from the story in Ekev in chapter 8 as well. God refers to the desert as an affliction. So, was it a great kindness of God in the desert, or was it an affliction, or something combined? Sure, it's an affliction, but that's how you're supposed to live. You live a Spartan life so you can study Torah. And then, based on this, the Kli Yakar says something which kind of brings us all down to earth, down to here today in 2020. What does it mean? One of the prominent ideas we shared was the idea that the Jews had their own laundry. That's what it says in this week's parsha. They had an automatic laundry system. Today we have washing machines, it's clothes. So he says, what does that mean for us today? Is there anything left of that? Is that just a miracle that happened once? So he says, if you look in the Gemara, it kind of says, in a very weird passage, it kind of says that you could still have that miracle of the clothing even today. What did Rabbi say? So you have to realize that if you're not so familiar with Talmud, in the Talmud, they speak a lot about like ghosts and things like that. There are different ways of understanding what the Talmud means by demons and ghosts. One is that they really believe in demons. And who knows, maybe we're wrong. Maybe we can't see it with our microscopes, but there are demons. Who knows? So that's possible. Another idea, I think the Meiri says it, that really there's no such thing as demons, but people in those days believed in demons, so they spoke that language, even though they didn't really believe it. Or they meant exactly what we see in a microscope. In other words, the question is, why do my clothes wear out? Why don't my clothes last? What's wrong with me? Why do my clothes always wear out? What happens? What's the physical process that takes place? Is it just the abrasion of my skin against the shirt? Are there also certain microorganisms that are at work that wear down my clothes? So based on that, listen to this. The Rava says, one of the great Talmudists, he says, when you get to a lecture and it's very crowded, before COVID, people used to get together just to remind everyone, and they would be shoulder to shoulder. So he says, why was it so crowded? Were there really that many Jews who showed up to the class? So he says, no. There are demons there, and they make it seem more crowded than it is. So you could say also, they're you're standing there, someone, you're not really shoulder to shoulder, but you feel pressure because there are microorganisms between you. There are molecules and air and oxygen and stuff between me and my neighbor. It makes it feel crowded. He says, what about stand up for 20 minutes? Why do your knees get tired? He says, today we're learning a lot about how a lot of microorganisms live in our stomach. Maybe there are microorganisms in our joints that make us need hip replacements and all that. And then he says the following. The rabbis' clothes. Rabbis used to wear a special, like a tallis over their head. It was like a special hat. But it wasn't just a hat. It was like a turban that was attached to their clothes. It was sort of like the Arabs. And he says, well, why do they wear out? So the question. He answers, it's from the same thing. It's from those demons. There's a friction of the rabbi's garments with the demons, and that's why, with the molecules, with the microscopic organisms that are in the air, and they wear away the rabbi's clothes. and also, et cetera, et cetera. So the Kli Yakar was a rabbi in 1600 or so in Poland, and he said, why are they picking on the rabbi's clothes? Why don't they ask, how come my clothes wear out? No, no, no. They ask, how come the great rabbis, their clothes wear out? So he says, oh, because their clothes should not wear out. Because since the great rabbis, and I don't mean me or something, but the truly great rabbis who study all day long and all night, and they're totally ensconced in Torah, they're living the desert-like existence. If you live a desert-like existence, you shouldn't need laundry. So the question was, why do they need laundry? Laundry is because of demonic forces, because there's atrophy. In the world that we live in, everything atrophies. You build a house and all of a sudden it sinks and it has leaks and it has cracks. And you say, what's going on? It's atrophy. There's the natural process of atrophy. But when it comes to a truly righteous person, there should be no atrophy. And there shouldn't be any need for buying a new suit. Your suit should last. You put your suit on, you wear it. What's the problem? So he says, well, there's other demonic forces that get rid of, that wear down the rabbi's clothing. But theoretically, they are that brought the lack of laundry in the desert even today. So this existence that we had in the desert was not necessarily something that was a once in a lifetime thing, special miracle in those days, but not again. But rather, the miracles in the desert are something that we could all experience even today. That if we live the really idyllic existence, somehow we'd be lucky. God would give us. God would provide. We'd have enough food. We'd have enough clothing. We'd have enough housing that we wouldn't have to worry about all these things. So, if we review a little bit, what did we say today? So we said that the Jews had an amazing thing. Their clothing didn't wear, their shoes didn't wear out. The Netziv saw it as a metaphor that even in the exile, even in the desert, which is like exile, God does these little miracles for us, and we can still have dignity with our clothing, even in the most difficult circumstances. And the Medrash has this whole idea of the clothing being laundered by the clouds, and we talked about the wonders of the desert, the well, the clouds, and that the clothing even grew with them as they grew older. We try to give naturalistic explanations as well, that they simply had enough clothing, not to worry about it, they didn't walk too fast, etc. However, the Ramban didn't like that. We said that it says they had no bread, but it could be sometimes they had bread, but usually they didn't. There were people who passed through the desert and gave them some bread. We said that the man tasted like whatever they wanted. It came with spices. It came with jewelry for the women particularly, and they didn't even have to go to the bathroom from this because it was just a perfect food for the human body. And we mentioned that maybe their feet didn't get swollen because they walked on air, they walked on clouds. And we said, why? Why did God give us all these special things? One idea was that the Brachot said that God wanted us to be able to focus on the Torah in the desert, and perhaps it's an idea of having trust and faith in God. We could live just on God alone. Finally, we mentioned that that the lesson was that if God provides for us under these difficult circumstances, surely He would provide for us today. And the Malbim said that the idea was to remove us from physicality too much, and to help instill in us the values of the Torah for those 40 years that we had no other focus other than that. But it also was an element of affliction as well. We said that even today we could achieve something like this if we really could, but somehow we're unable to do it. But in theory, this gift is there for those who want to dedicate themselves totally to the Torah. Even today, this notion of the desert is still an inspiration for great Torah scholars, so that you could somehow, maybe a person could theoretically live an existence that's completely, where God provides completely, But of course, you can't take this too much to an extreme. Otherwise, you don't have anything to eat. But in theory, you could live this kind of idyllic existence even today with the help of God. So those are some interesting thoughts on the existence of the Jews in the desert. Any questions or comments?
I got a question, Rabbi, about the well. It was. I've heard some people say it was Miriam was in charge of that, and then I've heard other people say that wasn't the case, and I don't know which it is.
No, that's what we said. We said that the well was in the merit of Miriam, that there were three leaders, there were three main miracles. Very strong midrash that it was because of Miriam that they had the well. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, this is going to sound kind of strange. If I was always told that we were punished because of the golden calf and therefore spent 40 years in the desert. But it sounds like
Good.
What you just said, a lot of the 40 years wasn't really punishment. If we were given food, given like the existence of clothes, and then like given the 10 Commandments and the Torah and the opportunity to study and learn, maybe the 40 years in the desert was possibly the best time in history that the Jews ever had.
Right. You see, right. So I've gotten you to think the rabbinic way, right? Because you're right. We're all brought up on the idea that the Jews in the desert were the worst. They did the golden calf. Then they refused to go to Israel. So they were punished to have 40 years in the desert, and they had to wander. Comes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he says, that was the best time ever. He said, best time ever? Why did God give them the best time ever? So why God did it? It's hard to say. Like if you look every Friday night, we say a psalm. 40 years I was fighting with those people, right? Probably the Jews tested God 10 times in the desert. So there is that idea. But there's this other idea that no, it was a very loving existence. That God, we say it on Rosh Hashanah, that God remembers how the love of our youth when the Jews followed God in the desert, whether that's just in the beginning, before we sinned, when we just went in with Moses into the desert, not knowing where to go, or whether it's the whole 40 years. But so it could be both. In other words, God punished us to wander for 40 years, but in those 40 years, either out of God's mercy or because the Jews weren't that bad, they were of the 40 years were a dor deah. We were a generation of knowledge. Because of all the time we had to study, we were tremendous knowledge, brilliant generation. So it could be both. You could both be the generation that's being punished, and also the most knowledgeable generation that ever was. This also depends on your view of physicality. You see, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is a mystic. He spent 14 years in a cave. Someone referred to him jokingly as a caveman. But someone like that would say, sons who like to study all the time, they would say, great, give me, a box of, bread and peanut butter and, 40 years in a base measure, and it'd be great for many people. And I think the simple sense of the verses is that the land of Israel, that's, we have plenty, and you have olive trees and pomegranates. You don't need pomegranates, right? It's a luxury fruit. Pomegranates and date palms and figs, these are things that you have in the Garden of Eden. It's not like bread. And you have wheat and barley. Those are basic staples. Grapes, all right, people need wine, something to drink. But pomegranates, these are luxuries. So the general sense is that it's in the land of Israel that we have the plenty, that we have the luxury of lots of food and comfort, and that's the real blessing. But what these rabbis are suggesting is, an existence where the physical part is not so good, that's a good thing. It's less emphasis on the physical. It's more opportunity to study. So I think what you're touching on is the tension between, as human beings, the big prize is to be in a place where every man has his own every man has their own vineyard, and you could sit under your own fig tree. And he said, you pull off a fig, you enjoy yourself. I met someone in the hospital who was a nurse who grew up with it. She says, she never bought anything, only salt and pepper. Everything else they grew on their own. That of course it takes a lot of work, but with no worries. So I think this is the tension between the mystics who see very little value in having any kind of luxury, and on the other hand, the naturalists who see that, what do you mean, if you have grapes and pomegranates, that would be great. That would be wonderful. Based on this question, the rabbi, any spirituality in the desert, he needs to eat the fruits of Israel. But some people, holy fruits of Israel. So I think you're touching on a tension here. On the one hand, between two schools of thought, the more naturalistic and the more supernaturalistic, and you're also hitting on the tension as to between sort of the human need for luxury, which would say that Israel is a place of luxury and the desert is a place of deprivation, and on the other hand, the spiritual ideal that you could live without luxury, you could just live on the basics. So very, very interesting question and point, Diana.
Okay.
Did I address your question, or it's still
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Anybody? Any other questions or follow-ups or any other questions?
It sounds more like the 40 years was more of a refinement. Might have been a little bit of a punishment in the sense of you don't get to go to Israel yet, but it wasn't like hard labor. It was just, okay, you go to your room and think about it for a little while, and when you've thought about it, we'll try this again.
Yes, very good. People talk about Egypt being that process. By being in Egypt, we went through the Kura Barza, we went through like a furnace, and we were purified. And the desert also plays that process as well. So there's a refinement. Excellent. So that answers Diana's question a little more smoothly. They were punished for 40 years in the desert, but that punishment, what's the purpose of punishment? I think that, right, what's the purpose of punishment is refinement, is rehabilitation. These 40 years rehabilitated them. This sinful bunch who had the golden calf and didn't want to go to Israel, they were refined by the 40 years. And with that, it was both affliction, but also education. And education, of course, is ideal. That woman spoke at the Republican National Convention. She spent all those years in jail. It was terrible, but there she learned how to be an artist, and she wrote a book. And you could, through your punishment, when the penal system works right, you walk out, like Natan Sharansky, he walked out. He was a great philosopher. So a penalty it can also turn into an educational experience. Very good, excellent. Thank you. Okay, great day, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.